Right, this is how you replace a manual inflator. It's going to be the same whether there's one inflator on there or two inflators on there. It's almost the same for automatic inflators, the Halkey-Roberts ones. The gaskets are a little different, but you can see that. So let's just talk through this. And if you remember in a previous lesson, we were talking about how one, plastic takes a set, and the other thing is that these gaskets around here, this top gasket here and the bottom gasket here, are vitally important pieces of gear to keep the CO2 heading in the right direction into the vest. So how would you actually replace those? This is the best gasket removal tool in the world. It's called a paper clip, available almost anywhere. A little bend on there and you've got it. And I'll just show you. I just go behind this flat side and just tilt it up and pull that off. And if you look at that, you may be able to see what kind of set the plastic is taken. And then we're going to get rid of that. And you just pull this thing off. And that gasket there is taking a set too. It's really squashed down to where the pressure is taking it. And so that's why you want to replace these things whenever you're doing a functional, or I say no more than 2 years you want to replace these things. So you pull that one off and you discard. And while we're in here, that's the Schrader valve. And we're going to go ahead and, just for grins, we're going to replace the Schrader valve. This is a Schrader tool. And that just twists out. This is the one that's sized for your car up top, by the way. And that's the Schrader valve. And I can look and see that this gasket is just train wrecked from being over pressured. Might not have leaked. It didn't cut it, but it's really squashed up right there on the ends. That gasket also keeps the air from leaving the bladder, so it'll leak right there. It can leak right there. That's one of the primary places that bladders leak, is from around that Schrader valve. So we'll go ahead and put this new fresh one in. And Schrader valves just drop in. And some people don't even use Schrader valves. They'll just go straight, because you don't need the Schrader valve. It's not necessary. But we put Schrader valves here at LSC because it's an extra gasket to keep the CO2 in. If you had just if these seals are good and the CO2 cylinder is sealed, that should be all by itself airtight and keep the CO2 in. So the Schrader valve is like an extra layer of protection there, on an extra gasket to keep things where they need to be. So let's install this one. They just screw down, and the manufacturer says 1 psi, and 1 psi is, or 1 inch-pound is almost impossible to measure on any device. So you just go till it's fully seated. You can feel that gasket fully seat. Once you get down to the bottom and it's a little back pressure, quarter turn. That's all you got. That's a good set, and that thing won't leak. If it does leak on you, on Schrader valves, if you're doing a leak check and you notice this thing there's some bubbles coming out with the leak check fluid, you can give it just another maybe 1/8 of a turn, but you don't want to go much farther than that, because you're gonna make it worse. So what we do when we see a leak is we back it off a couple turns, take it back down to fully seated, and give it that quarter turn, and that's a well set Schrader valve. Now, back to replacing the inflator. So there's a bottom and a top gasket there. The bottom gasket's fatter than the top gasket. That's a 479 kit from us, and you just stretch that around there and make sure it goes all the way to the bottom, because they like to hang up on that lip there. So all the way to the bottom. This thing will go on a couple of ways, so don't, you'll end up causing yourself problems. It's a self-critiquing skill, because the cylinder is going to be facing the wrong way. But just make sure you've got that facing the right way. Threads the cylinder side up. Drop that top gasket on there. and then this goes on. I always suggest you do all this work with the inflator with the CO2 cylinder out, because if you blow this thing with this not tightened down, there's going to be a lot of CO2 right in your face, and it can be dangerous for a number of reasons. So we put that on there finger tight, and the torque on this nut is 24 to 30 inch-pounds. So you set your wrench, your torque wrench, your calibrated torque wrench, to 24 inch-pounds. And you want to hold on to this tight. Holding the torque wrench from the end. Click. That's it. That's 25 inch-pounds. And now that's set. Go ahead and pin this down. And this is a preference. We don't install these on aviation vests, but this recess is meant to take this pin, and that's a tamper pin. So you know that if I yank that, it'll break that away. There's smaller red ones people use. That's a green one. The U.S. Coast Guard, for example, doesn't use them because if it does go off in the airplane, then there's a piece of plastic floating around. I'm just going to break that one. That's what happens when you break it. All right, and so reset that, and then install your CO. Oh, I forgot. There's also a gasket in there that you can replace. That's the 484S gasket. That's the cylinder seat gasket. And the way you replace a cylinder seat gasket, the best removal tool ever. I won. There it is. So that's the old one. Take that out. I've got a brand new, fresh one. You just drop it in, and you've got to push it past the threads in there. So it's an effort. But a fresh cylinder seat gasket's also a good idea, because if that's cracked or leaking, again, it's more likely that CO2, not as all the CO2 will get into the vest if that's not good. Now, I've replaced the cylinder seat gasket. I screw that in, and in our manual it says you turn this in finger tight. So what's finger tight? Holding it with my fingers only from the end here, I twist it. Maybe that. That's finger tight. That's not going to leak. That's a well set inflation valve. So that's how we do that. Ready to go. That's replacing a manual inflator valve. That's the same for whether there's one of them, two of them on a dual chamber bladder, and almost the same procedure for the automatics, but we'll show you that later.